Nkosazana Dlamini's observations have drawn a lot of ire, and the DA calls Dr. Dlamini Zuma's comments a fabrication in an attempt to deflect attention away from real problems. And they put the onus on Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga to ensure that schools are not politicized. Tim Gordon, the national CEO of the governing body foundation, says there is no directive or policy approach at schools that politics be taught in such a manner. And another education expert, Professor Roxana Osman, says the state should not meddle in what is taught in schools. And joining us on the line, Thabang Mohlomoza from COSAS, the provincial chairperson for Gauteng. Siso Mahlangu, resident political analyst, in studio with us, and Professor Elias Matipa, education expert. You at home, as always, the lines are open to you. We'll start in studios. Fiso, good to have you. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. Is this an overreaction, or can we say that it is a sad reality or complete ignorance on the part of the minister?
Good evening,
rather,
Cindy,
NEC member.
and good evening to the viewers at home. I'm glad that someone had to finally speak out against this, and it had to be Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I think for a long time nobody has spoken out or touched the reality of what our children or African children go through in what is considered the Model C schools. The structure of schooling in South Africa post-1994 was, there's the Model A, which is the previously disadvantaged school where an African language or vernacular is still the language of learning. The Model B school, which is just strict English and Afrikaans and offers no other, alternative vernacular language. And then the Model C schools that offer other languages or just offers English and Afrikaans, but is also open to black children. And so the Model C schools often cry foul, or the children bring back. You've seen in the newspapers where grade 3s or grade 2s come home to say, teacher said Zuma is corrupt, or, during electioneering season, where the children are sort of informed of supposed corruption. Those teachers are usually white and teaching black children. I think the crisis developed because many parents were taking children from the townships and taking them to what was considered the English schools because they were better. And of course they had to be better because the apartheid government supplied only 10% of the population and equipped those schools. And whilst the other 90 schools in the township suffered and had to teach Bantu education, the previously called white schools blossomed with all the resources and all the facilities. And so whilst it seemed very good for black people to take their children there, there's still educators who still possess the fallacies and the ideologies of racism and apartheid and want to trash black people, trash the black agenda, trash the ANC, and sort of bring African children up to hate themselves, to hate black people, to see everything corrupt about a black government. And this is the education that they perpetuate unto black children. All right, let's get another perspective from COSA's provincial chair for Gauteng, Thabang Mohlomoza. Thabang, thanks so much for joining us on the line. Good evening to you. Is this a sentiment, something that you share, in that Model C schools are peddling an anti-ANC propaganda? And what do you base your observation on?
Good evening to you too, and thanks for hosting us for your show. Was saying that was seconding the words uttered by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. It is indeed true that in this school, former Model C school, the teachers are teaching our children racism in such a manner whereby they politicize education. Like, for instance, you'll find when learners are supposed to do oral classes, they will tell them to do speeches, especially to the topic about corruption within the government itself. You'll find a question paper where learners are supposed to write an essay about the corruption that is taking place within the government of South Africa. The teachers are teaching learners what to think and read instead of how to think and how to read. Now, this is something that we're proud that people like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma stood up against such injustice, because of we share the very same sentiments with her, and we're saying that we need an educational transformation, a radical educational transformation. Prince EA just makes a quote that a doctor if a doctor prescribes all medicine to all patients, the results will be tragic. So why do we have to feed our students all of this one-size-fits-all system whereby we'll know that it's not willing to transform the lives of the students? Like, how do you say such a thing as a teacher in a class? And we're blaming SARTU for lack of political guidance because of these tendencies taking place also in township schools. You'll find a situation whereby teachers are still teaching learners politics, whereby they do not attend classes to teach or give assignment to learners, but they just come and sit in class in front of learners and tell them about how the government is corrupt.
All right, Mr. Mahlumuza, please stay on the line. We have Professor Elias Matipa, education expert. Professor Matipa, thanks so much. Good evening to you. As we just heard from Kosas, that there is a debate to be had around the decolonization, if you will, of our education system, and that teachers, not in the formal mode or methodology of teaching, may say implicit statements around what their perspectives are on the local, on the domestic political landscape. Is it your view that generally politics or the education system is being politicized against the ANC?
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the viewers. There is no education system that is neutral, politically speaking. There will always be politics in education as well. And then to take this matter further, I listened to the student that of Kosas. And then I feel he was talking something that already I align myself with, because even in the public schools in townships, politics are taking place there, where sometimes you find people or learners are out of school. You will remember 2015, students were out there marching against trade between Woolworths and Israel. That had nothing to do with their educational, well-being, but they were marching. And then these were students or learners from the townships. And then today we should understand that the children that are in the Model C schools are predominantly those of middle class. And then when you look at the politics, they affect the middle class in the majority. And then even in the home, there is this discussion about politics between parents and their children and everything. So when they carry this thing over to the schools, we become a little bit, worried that why are the schools also meddling around issues of politics? But you cannot divorce schools from the greater society. And my point would be that even if we look at the members of parliament, they are not in their majority from middle school, Model C schools. They are from the public schools. So that you can see they were politicized even in the public schools. So the issue of politicization is neither here nor there. And then I would think we should not be emotional. And then today with these issues of economy running into the families and into life in general, people will be
Professor Matipa, there's Tim Gordon, the national CEO of the governing body foundation, who says there isn't a directive or a policy statement or approach at schools that politics be taught that way. In other words, where you implicitly say the ANC is corrupt or black executive or whatever the narrative that the teacher is peddling. So how do you then monitor and evaluate and make sure that teachers stick to not verbatim, obviously, because there has to be discussions, but they stick to the main curricula or syllabus that they're teaching?
Yeah, well, there are checks and balances in the sense that there are objectives that must be achieved by the school. And then we have got tests, we have got other things like, for instance, homework and etc., where we would see whether they are achieving the curriculum or not. But, politics will come in here and there. It's not to say it's the main thing that is being done in the schools. Sometimes there will be some politics, but not that every time. You can see the Model C schools are performing quite well when it comes to the final result. You can see that they are really boosting the results of South Africa, matriculant or grade 12. So I wouldn't just like to be emotional and say politics are taking the upper hand.
All
It's
right.
just because...
Yeah,
Okay.
please stay on the line, Professor Matipa. We also have Siso Mahlangu, a resident political analyst in studio. I mean, there are some commentators saying that this is only a Dr. Nkosazana, a NDZ, as it were, 2017 that we're seeing, because the elective conference is coming in December. She had never spoken about radical economic transformation before, and there's no empirical evidence that indeed the ANC or anti-ANC agenda is being pushed in Model C schools.
Well, it would be very difficult for her to be here in this country pushing radical economic transformation while she was the AU chairperson at the same time. But if anyone perhaps wants to qualify why Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is fit to speak, is because, number one, she's a mother of children in this country, besides the fact that she's held two portfolios as minister and has done very, very well. But I think this is a comment that any parent who takes a child to school, particularly at a Model C school, can make. One does not need to be a minister, or one does not need to be an aspirant politician to make those decisions. And I feel that the people who think that she's making this statement because she wants to be the president might be wrong, because there are many people who would possibly want to be the president. But I think the challenge is that there was a lack of transformation in the school system, particularly in the Model C schools, even after the advent of democracy in this nation, because the progress has been very minimal. And I think you must understand that change cannot just happen in 23 years, but there are still children or schools that are, in dire need, some without desks and some under trees in this country. In the Eastern Cape, some without walls, and there are safety hazards in those schools. And I think perhaps that's where our governments have erred in that participation. But one should not overlook that there is politicking in these schools, and it's affecting young minds. And some teachers perhaps do it unconsciously, but some do it with a conscious agenda to perhaps indoctrinate them into an anti-revolutionary stance, into an anti-ANC or an anti-Zuma stance, and then it becomes very, very dangerous. But before you take the next call, I just want to ask Cindy. In the last few weeks, we saw anti-Zuma marches across the country. Some Model C schools closed that Friday. Why did they close? Because the children don't participate in the marches. It had nothing to do with the schools. They should just carry on and teach the curriculum. So those schools shut down. Why? Because many of those schools, teachers and principals, want to facilitate an anti-black agenda.
All right,
That's
so
the problem.
I have to take Rahim in Johannesburg. Hello, Rahim. Do you also agree that schools or education has been politicized largely in Model C schools?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm a matric student currently, and I do agree that we should have a lot of transformation in the education and the curriculum of the schools, because I take history, and we learn a lot of Afrikaner nationalism, the history of that. We learn about capitalism in America in the 1920s, but children don't know the founders of the ANC. They don't know Dr. Pixley, Kai Saka, Saul Plaatjes. They don't know who Steve Biko is. They don't know who Ahmed Kathrada is, but they know Mandela. And I do believe that, yes, Model C schools are being, well, I say to a certain extent, racist. But if you say that they're indoctrinating students to say that the ANC is corrupt and that, they're not doing that. I think that students are not blind, they're not deaf, and they can hear and see. Schools have to show what's right and what's wrong. And if the current government is wrong, schools have to do their job to say that this is wrong and that is right. Now, the transformation, I think I do agree that we need to transform the education hugely. But I don't think Model C schools are saying, indoctrinating students to think that the ANC government is corrupt. They're seeing it for themselves. So that the political analyst on your show is completely wrong when he's saying things like that, because our schools are designed for a certain thing. And when you say that schools are that they're indoctrinating students, it's absolutely wrong.
All right, Rahim, your narrative taken, but of course it depends on which side of the fence you sit, and primarily if the teacher is to give one particular aspect of our politics, why not talk about all the other political parties if more and more from the anecdotes we're hearing from our panelists is more around the ANC and how that party is perceived to be corrupt. But Thabang, just back to you. As parents, how do we engage our youngsters when they come home and they're told that, for example, the adaptation of Long Walk to Freedom by Chris van Wyk, a children's book, you are told that it's too political. How do we weave the reality without necessarily tarnishing the young minds?
You see, there's quite a big difference between propaganda and politics, and we are not inspired by such people who justify propaganda like that. We are clear and we are saying that Nkosazana is correct. She knows that for a radical economic transformation, we need to undergo to a radical educational transformation. Hence, she's stating this. We are saying that we are going to find all of this evidence because we are victims of these question papers, we are victims of these teachers. We are going to name and shame all of these schools that we are talking about. Well, this is not just a fantasy that we're dreaming of. This thing is happening. This is another new form of racism is denying that racism indeed exists. And such people who are still justifying such propaganda are culprits of racism themselves. We are clear that we need an urgent educational transformation. We are saying that the Department of Education must take charge of everything, every teaching and learning activity that takes place in our schools.
Just stay on the line. We have to say goodbye to Professor Matipa. But just before you go, a response to Rahim saying that it's not even the teachers that necessarily have to repeat what's generally out there in the mainstream media. This is something that is not specifically only done in the classroom, but it's generally what the popular, vernacular has been around South Africa.
We have spoken so much that the issue of saying anti-ANC has been clouded. I would like to say there is more racism than I could look at the issues. And the point of racism in terms of schools, giving them resources, and then schools where children are attending under the trees, etc., etc., it's something that is a different story than, say, teachers are teaching the learners to be anti-ANC. And then that's why my conclusion would be that this thing is not done on a large scale. Maybe here and there are these things where a certain teacher or a few teachers are anti-ANC, but it's not to say the schools are actually going all out and not using their curriculum or syllabus to teach what they ought to teach. All right, the issue of transformation of the curriculum is something that is outstanding. It's a bigger issue that needs to be embarked upon, not piecemeal, but it's a bigger issue. And then we all subscribe to it that we should have an African approach and then look at things in an African way. I like the student who spoke about the history that they are doing in Form 5 or grade 12, which hasn't got much to do with the history of South Africa, where we would know where the ANC started, and etc., etc. But it has got to deal with things that are outside the country, which is South Africa, European history, and etc., etc.
Professor thank you so much, Professor Elias Matipa, education experts joining us on the line. We have Matayla in Potchefstroom. Thanks for your patience. Good evening to you. Hi, Matayla.
How are you, Cindy?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm well, and you?
What's your question
Cindy,
or comment?
Cindy, let's call a spade a spade. If people are marching downtown, the president is standing and say it's racism. If he take a stand and address the nation, it's apartheid. Now it's Nkosazana Zuma on the anti-ANC. I mean, the ANC is clearly running out of ideas. There is no such thing. After 23 years, you decide to stand up and say people at school are being taught anti-ANC. Why all along was somebody not standing up and talking about it? It's clearly indicating that it's not about children taught wrong in Hammanskraal, it is clear the ANC is running out of idea because there's election coming up next, so they're trying to do a smear campaign. On the issue of transformation, you cannot force black teachers to go to white schools, white teachers to go to black schools. It is them who allocate themselves that we blacks we're going to taught in our villages, we white we're going to. No one is saying no, who must go there, whoever.
Yeah. But Mantayela, I'm sure there are also other systemic barriers to entry, why we're not seeing a more diverse representation of teachers in Model C schools. But we'll have Asfiso respond to that, saying that the ANC, well, I suppose this is a thumbs up from Dr. Dlamini Zuma, as per the caller, and that, you know, the reform could have happened during the 23 years of democracy.
Well, you know, the first caller actually said the young children at school see the corruption for themselves, and it's not the teachers who are indoctrinating them. But contradicting herself, she said these children are too young to know Ahmed Kathrada, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu. If they are too young to know Walter Sisulu, but they can
they're
still,
not taught.
You know, but how do they still see corruption for themselves? I think no child sees corruption. If one sees that corruption is happening, they need to go to the SAPS. What we're calling against, and what I have a problem with, is when a teacher makes statements, an educator makes statements that insinuate or suggest, or an exam or an essay is written to say, why were things better under apartheid? I think that's a problem because it's a narrative that suggests that black people are incompetent and a black government cannot perform. And that, I think, should be shut down. Nkosazana Zuma is coming out and saying these kids are taught, you know, to hate the ANC. Cannot be a generic statement. Perhaps not everybody does it, but it needs to be spoken and said it has happened. A few months ago, there was a matter of a school in Johannesburg where a teacher said to a child, did your parents vote for the ANC? And the child said yes. He says, well, that's why you're so dumb. And it was a big thing, and it made it into the papers. So I don't think these things should be overlooked. And I don't think people should use Nkosazana Zuma as a feast ahead of 2019 simply because she has made this statement. This statement is a statement that any of us can make or should have made. I don't know why other people didn't make it in 23 years. I believe there were some who made it, but she possesses the profile to make such a statement. What we should go against is the nuance and the ideologies and the fallacies that blacks are incompetent and cannot run any country. Perhaps a black agenda and a black opinion and black consciousness should reside with our own children to a point where we are comfortable in taking our children to township schools because they can deliver as much as we think that the Model C schools can do. And perhaps it is up to government to emancipate our so-called black schools so much that we don't have to take our children out of the townships. But any teacher who seems to propel a political agenda, one against the other, and not just against the ANC, against any party in any school, I think as South Africans we must condemn that with the highest possible terms. Yeah,
let's get a word from the students at Tabang, just very briefly, especially students that find themselves in that diverse cultural environment where it may not always be a safe or even a conducive environment to discuss your political affiliations or preferences, and even taking on teachers if they step out of line and trying to insinuate or unduly influence a particular thinking process. How do you empower young people to just make up their mind? And I know I'm generalizing because they're very well astute, but to be able to stand for what your virtues are, for what you believe in without any compromise?
Firstly, you know, it's better now or never. So, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is clear to speak about this now, and we're going to join on a call at the Congress of South African Students to fight for this. Part of our pillars is mass mobilization. As the Congress of South African Students, we aim to mobilize each and every student so that we are able to have them speak for themselves and think for themselves, so that they are able to see what the entire country is itself and what their teachers are feeding them. We are saying that we've demanded that a history and a relevant history must be made a compulsory subject for all students. We are saying that the curriculum must be transformed. Why do we have to wait? We are saying that we all believe in the education of a black child or in education for a better future. Why do we have to wait for another 23 years or whatsoever? It's better for us to act now. This is the time for us to start realizing that things will no longer change themselves. Things must be changed.
All right,
Now,
we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry to break you. We're Tabang Mahlomoza from the COSA's Provincial Chairperson for Gauteng, Sfiso Mahlangu, resident political analyst, and Professor Elias Matipa, education expert on the line. And thank you so much for calling in as well. We'll take a quick